My name is Mark Rendle. You may remember me from last night. If you were expecting more of that, sorry. There will be no singing, unless it's going really badly and I feel the need to turn it round. um, this is the sensible talk. This is app metrics and dashboarding and all that sort of stuff. And hello, where were you 20 seconds ago when we started? Eating sandwiches, that's where you were. I know. Get your priorities right. Why were all you guys here already? The sandwiches. So, yes, no, app metrics and dashboards and things. And I'm very inconsistent with my talks at conferences. I'm absolutely useless at the whole building a brand and becoming known as an expert on one thing like Troy Hunt, which is why he has jet skis and Porsches, and I can't afford a new laptop. And so it's whatever I'm excited about at the moment. And what I'm excited about this year is metrics, which is quite sad, actually. Now I'm reevaluating my life. But no, this is so. The reason that I'm quite excited about metrics is the place where I'm working, and I'm not going to name them because it turns out that when a customer is paying you $1 million a day, I've rounded up to the nearest million. If you go out and go, this place are useless, then that really upsets them. So I've stopped doing that. But no, I'm working at this place. And last year, they drafted me onto this team. We've got a big WPF application, 120 projects, hundreds of screens and Prism and Unity and all those things. And it was slow. I mean, taking minutes from double-clicking the icon to the application actually starting. And they said, right, this year we're putting a big effort into optimizing it and making it load faster and work faster. And so I joined the first meeting of this team to optimize this product, and people were going, well, I think it might be the data binding. I think it might be this. I think it might be that. And I said, do you not actually know what's slow? And they said, no. And I said, do you think we should measure it? And they went, oh, how would we do that? And so I said, okay. And I went off and I added in measurements of all the things that were happening at startup and how long everything was taking. And it turned out that during the startup process, it had to load 20,000 products from a product microservice elsewhere in the system. And it was this was a gRPC service. And so it was supposed to batch together 20,000 product IDs and stream them all up to this service, and then it would stream all the products back down again. What it was actually doing was opening a connection, getting one product, having it back again, closing the connection, opening the connection again, getting the next 20,000 times. And when they saw this, they went, that's not right. Why is it measuring those individually? And I said, because they're happening individually. And they went, oh. And so they fixed it, and it took 1.5 minutes off the startup time. And they went, right, put more metrics in. We'll see if we can catch some other stuff. And so I did. And over the course of the year, I just thought, this is fun. I actually am enjoying this, and it's highlighting lots of areas where other people can then come in and fix the bugs. So I get to do the exciting stuff with the metrics and the dashboards and everything, and then someone else has to come and fix the bugs, which is my favorite kind of programming. And this is the thing is, you cannot improve what you're not measuring. If you're not measuring it, you don't know what's slow, you don't know what's fast, you don't know what needs attention. And like I say, this is a WPF application, and we're using all the modern sort of Influx and Graphhonor and all these things, but we're using them with a nearly 20-year-old WPF application. You know, most of it's newer than that, but it has still got hash tables and array lists in there because when they first wrote it, it was on .NET 1.1. And also, dashboards are cool. Everybody's talking about dashboards, although sadly, not .NET people, not enough. We seem to be behind the curve on this. Even the Java guys have got metrics all over their code now, but .NET still not so much. So that's why. So I just want to make one thing kind of clear at the start of the talk. Metrics and logs are different things. Okay? So metrics is all about numbers and being able to group and aggregate those numbers and put them onto charts and nice dashboards and bar charts and pie charts and gauges and all sorts of lovely things like that. Logs are essentially the messages from your application saying, I've just done this, this has just happened, that's happened again, this exception has been thrown, here's the stack trace. Logs go into Elasticsearch or Splunk or Loggly, and you can query across them, and you can get some metrics out of it. You can say, how often is this exception being thrown? But it's not designed for that. Metrics data goes into a different kind of database, and you use different tools to query it and report on it. Metrics tends to be the radiators and the dashboards and the big screens with the reds and the greens, and logs tends to be lots of text. So, what should we measure? Basically everything. If you can measure it, if you can represent it as a number, then you should. Okay, so number of events, that's a fairly easy one. How often is a thing happening? How many times does a thing happen per minute? If it's a good thing, then we want that to be happening a lot. If it's a bad thing, then we want it to be happening 0. And that would be ideal. And this can be things from an exception being thrown. One of the things we're measuring now is data binding errors, which was fun, trying to figure out a way to get WPF to actually tell us when there's a data binding error. That involves passing text at this point. Now WPF is going open source. I'm going to fix that when they finally put the code on GitHub. But it could also be how often is a feature getting used. So it could be traditional analytics. We've put this really cool feature in the product. Are people using it? No. Why not? Because we've hidden it halfway down a menu and nobody knows it's there. You can measure throughput. So network, how fast is data moving around your network? How many items are coming back from a request to a web service, how much of that data is actually needed, that sort of thing. Timing's very important. If you're doing a web application, how long is it taking me to process different requests? And is that within acceptable parameters? How long is it taking me to do a database query? Can I tune that database query? And just anything. Everything takes time, and you want to make sure it's not taking too much time. And system data. So unless you're doing serverless, and I think we all know how I feel about that, then you have your application, your code is running on a machine somewhere, and that machine has a CPU, and it has memory, and it has a network card, and it has a disk. And you want the system data that shows you how much of those things are being used, and if anything is causing a bottleneck, if anything's at 100%, then you need to change that component or scale up to the next size of machine or whatever it might be. So for web applications, we're talking about things like requests, page and area accesses within the application, response times, response status codes, so how many are 200s, how many are 404s, how many are 500s, error counts, and outgoing network activity, so database requests and requests to other microservices, how long are those taking? For native applications, and this could be WPF, or it could be Xamarin iOS applications, whatever it might be, startup time is a very important one. If you've got an application that people start at the beginning of the day and close at the end of the day, then it's not that desperate. But if you've got an application that people open when they need something out of it and then close it again, then that needs to start quickly. And also shut down quickly. This application that I was talking about also took 2 minutes to shut down. And I don't know about you, but when I have an application and I click close and then it displays an undismissible dialog box for 2 minutes that goes, currently closing, and you're like, what the hell are you doing? Visual Studio. Feature usage, are people using the new feature you put in? That's important. Performance of things within the application and errors, and always database and HTTP request timings. System data, we've got CPU, memory, disk, network, and I/O, and as .NET developers, we also have the CLR. And I'm going to be showing how we can actually pull some of the information out of the .NET runtime in .NET Core and push that through to our metrics database and chart it against everything else, which is very handy because you can kind of go, right, so here, this request has suddenly started taking a long time, and the thread pool is saturated. Maybe those two things are related. So, how to measure? There are lots of different ways of measuring, and I've got several talks on this. I've got one about diagnostic source as well, and the slides for them are the same up to this point, and then it changes depending on which version of the talk this is. So for this one, I'm going to be talking to you about app metrics. App metrics is a .NET port of a Java metrics library. It started out that way, and the Java metrics library is just called metrics. It's by a guy called Coda Hale. And it's the kind of standard for monitoring in Java, and app metrics aims to be the standard for monitoring in .NET, and it provides lots of really useful stuff straight out of the box. It's open source. It's mainly one guy who's developing it, and he's just committing to GitHub like a and trying to keep up with the .NET Core team, who keep releasing new versions that do new things, and he has to update his code to work with it. But app metrics is absolutely great. You can go to app-metrics.io. There's lots of good documentation, and I'm going to show you some of the best stuff here. In order to do that, I made a demo application specifically for this conference. And because I've got metrics in it, I know that 28 people are using it, and one of them's me. So you're all a bunch of bastards. But if you want to hit ndc.bingo right now, if you haven't been playing it, then you can start playing it. And if you hit it from your phones now and create an account and stuff, then by the time I actually show you my live dashboards, there'll be some data in, and that would be nice. But yes, it's a very stupid little thing where it generates you a bingo card with different subjects and different things to do, and you can go, I saw a talk about that, I spoke to somebody about that, I met somebody in the expo, and you can fill in lines and eventually get to 10 out of 10 lines. If you get a card that you really hate, just go in and delete your cookies, because they're stored in your cookies. I keep the player data so that I can spam you. But I don't care about your actual cards. Oh yes, there it is. I put a screenshot into the thing so I wouldn't need to switch to the browser, and I'm an idiot. There we go. So this NDC Bingo project, it's ASP.NET Core MVC 2.2. It's using a PostgreSQL database, and it's hosted on DigitalOcean, which I have recently discovered is the best thing ever. They now do managed Kubernetes, they do managed PostgreSQL databases, and hosting things there costs about half what it does on Azure, so screw you, Microsoft. Take away my MVP. So yes, that's where it's running. We'll dig into that a bit later. And so using app metrics, it's really quite easy. This is going to be a short talk. So it essentially consists of some NuGet packages, and then you do things in your program.cs file and your startup.cs file, and that's it, actually, at that point. So if I go over to the code here, so this is my NDC Bingo application. People at the back, do you have good eyesight, or do I need to make that a little bit bigger? I got a thumbs up from right at the back there. So yes, I have got 3 app metrics packages in here. I've got app.metrics.asp.NET Core.mvc, and I'm using the 3.1 alpha because that's the version that works with ASP.NET Core 2.2. and it does actually have a few changes in there because of the big changes to the routing tables that they did in 2.2. I have appmetrics.extensions.configuration and reporting.influxdb, and we'll come back to that a bit later. But actually turning on appmetrics in your application works like this. So I have my program class. If you're not familiar with .NET Core and ASP.NET Core yet, then two things. One, .NET applications and web applications are now a console application. And two, I will shortly be launching School of Grok with online video courses where I will teach you ASP.NET Core at a very reasonable price. But your program.cs file, I've got to get something out of this, except, you know, just having a great time and meeting loads of interesting people and getting free food and drink. You know what? It's not too bad. So yeah, but you have a console application, and in your program class, you create a web host builder, and then you run it, and that's basically it. And all I've done to turn on metrics here is within my create default builder, I've got an extension method called useMetrics, and that registers all the things for dependency injection. It starts a few internal services. It does everything that you need it to do. Okay, so that's one of the things that you need to do. And then the other thing that you need to do is in your startup class, which is the equivalent of global.ax. This is where you do all your configuration and set up your services and everything. And we just, after services.addMVC.setCompatibility version, we put add metrics in there. So, use metrics in program, add metrics in startup. And if I go to here and do .NET run, I've declared a variable E, but I'm not using it. Bad, Mark, bad. And then I go to my local host, and it's not working. Because why? Oh no, I know why that is. It's because I need to say $env ASP.NET Core _development environment equals development. And then we'll try that again. There we go. Yes. Very important, ASP.NET Core _environment. Normally I run it from Rider, but I like to use code for giving talks because you can zoom in and out really easily and make things bigger and smaller. So yes, I have my local version of the site running here. So just from doing use metrics in program.cs and add metrics in startup.cs, I now have metrics within my application, and I can just go to /metrics here, and it outputs all my metrics as JSON, and I can see everything in there. I don't need any external storage. This is all just in process, in memory, on this machine. And I could just hit this from somewhere else and scrape these metrics off. If I take this same URL and open it up in Firefox, which is a far superior browser to Chrome, it'll actually give me the nice JSON view that Firefox gives you with collapsing and things. And so that is all just straight out of the box. From just adding, I actually only need one of the NuGet packages for that. I don't need the InfluxDB, I don't need the configuration, I just need the appmetrics ASP.NET Core package in there, and I get that. Appmetrics does also do health checks, by the way. I won't be covering the health checks because .NET Core 2.2 also does health checks, and that seems to be the better way to go, and appmetrics is integrating its health checks with the built-in health checks. And how many more times can I say health checks? No, that was it. No more. So that's it. That's basically very, very easy to do. That's that demo. But it's much more interesting if we can get to a point where we can do something useful with the data that this is generating. Because AppMetrics is quite opinionated about what to track and how to track it. And so when I call that .addMetrics extension method on the MVC builder in my startup CS, it doesn't just turn on a service, it adds a whole bunch of hooks around things like request processing time and various other, it catches errors and it tracks the response status codes, and it does a whole bunch of stuff, and it starts generating the kind of basic set of metrics that everybody should want from this out of the box. And then it says, now you can make a nice dashboard with this. And the dashboard is, if we don't have the dashboard at the end of the day, then what the hell is the point? It is all about the pretty pictures. So to create a dashboard, you need somewhere outside of your application to actually store the metrics, and then you need something that can talk to that storage facility and turn those raw numbers into pretty pictures and charts and graphs and alerts and other things. And all this software comes under the umbrella of APM, which I thought stood for Application Performance Monitoring until I went to write talks about this stuff, and then I discovered it stands for Application Performance Management. But it's basically the same thing. There's a brilliant website you can go to called openapm.io, and this has a whole bunch of different bits of software for all different aspects of application performance management. So it's got metrics, it's got time series databases, it's got dashboard tools, it's got libraries. You can tell it what stack you're using, and it will say these are the things that are compatible with this stack. If you work through this and you say I'm doing a .NET application, then it will actually recommend AppMetrics as one of the libraries that is available. It also covers other things like Elasticsearch and logging tools and tracing tools like Jaeger and Open Tracing. It's a whole bunch of stuff on there. It's a really useful site. I'm going to be fairly opinionated for this talk because I can't demonstrate everything. So for storage, the 5 main options at the moment are Influx DB and Prometheus. Those are the 2 big ones. There's TSDB, Time Series Database. There's Timescale DB, which is actually just a bunch of extensions for Postgres. And there's Graphite, which is a bit older and is showing its age, but is properly open source. So Influx has a freemium model, a single instance of Influx. You can use the open source software, but if you want a cluster, you have to pay enterprise licensing. Graphite lets you create clusters. What I do is I use lots of single instances of InfluxDB and I shard my data across them. And so that works quite well, and I don't have to give them any money. Because why should I support the development of something that's absolutely critical to my day-to-day development and supporting my systems? My customer has paid them huge amounts of enterprise money because they do. I'm working for one of those places that goes, no, we don't do free. No, find someone who will charge us £1 million a year, and then we're in. Yeah, I love these guys. So yes, so for storage, I'm going to be showing InfluxDB, and I'll explain a bit more about why shortly. And for visualization, basically it's Graphhonor. That is the only game, everyone uses Graphhonor. There is Kibana, which is the Elasticsearch tool, but Kibana is more appropriate for working with Elasticsearch and with logs, although they're trying to make it work with Influx and Prometheus and do metrics. At the same time, Graphhonor are trying to make that work with Elasticsearch and doing log queries and so forth. There's also Chronograph, which is Influx's own specific Influx query and dashboarding tool, which is useful, and I'll show that as well. It's useful for different things than Graphhonor. So in Flux DB, you can go to influxdata.com. You can download the open source version. I think it's currently on 1.7 point something. There's a 1.8 coming soon, and there's a 2.0 which will be out at some point this year, which has an awesome new query language, and it's very exciting. But I have learned not to show alpha software in talks at conferences because it doesn't go well. Graphhonor. You can go to graphhonor.com, you can download that. Their monetization model is we will do hosted Graphhonor for you, and so you can spin up a cloud instance, and they will also spin up graphite databases and various other databases for you. So that works quite nicely. They're not difficult to spin up, they're not difficult to keep running. They are literally, they're Go applications, so it's just an executable, and you start it, and that's it. It's nice and easy. And Chronograph, like I say, it's part of Influx Data, so you can go to their website and you can get that and download that and run that as well. So, for my local setup, I use Docker these days for everything, because why wouldn't I? Is anyone not using Docker on a day-to-day basis as part of their development? Oh, good God, you poor people. Because, where's my thing gone? There we are. Depending on what I'm developing, I need different databases, I need different support facilities, I might need a Redis database, I might need a Postgres database, I might need a Microsoft SQL Server database, and you can get that in a Linux Docker image these days, because it's 2019 and the world has gone mad. So yes, I bang everything into a Docker Compose file, and you just create this by copying and pasting from your other Docker Compose files that you created previously. And then when I want to work on something, I just do Docker Compose up, and I work on it, and everything's there. And then when I'm done, I do Docker Compose stop, and it all goes away again, and then I load Fortnite. Not really. I suck at Fortnite. My daughter just kicks my ass. So yes, in here I've got my Postgres database, I've got my Influx database, I've got my Chronograph dashboard, and I've got my Graphhonor instance. I'm using Graphhonor 5.3.2 at the moment because they've done something in their React code which broke a dashboard in 5.4, so I rolled back to this one. But I will figure it out, get it fixed, and everything will start working again. So I think those are all running. Docker PS. Yes, they are. Excellent. So I can go to localhost 8888, and this is Chronograph. And in my Chronograph instance, so Chronograph is like the SQL Server Management Studio for Influx. So Graphhonor assumes that you know where your data is and what shape it is and what tags it's got, and it lets you kind of enter queries and craft them, but it's not great for just poking around the database and seeing what's in there and discovering stuff. Chronograph is really good for that. So I can go into Chronograph and I can choose my database. I'll make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So I've got my Bingo database down here, and then I can expand out my application HTTP requests active, which is not a particularly good one for this point. So I can say appdex score, and then theoretically, if I go back to here and hit refresh a few times, I will get some data coming into here. No, I won't, because things never work the way they're supposed to work. Problem is, a bunch of them are, let's just go back the past 7 days. There we go, there's some data. That went in. So I can sort of go into here and get my application players thing, and I can go, oh, look, there was a player at that one point on that one day. That was me testing things. So that's Chronograph. And then I can go into Graphhonor, which will be localhost 3000, and log in. And change the password. I'm not going to do that now, because let's just go to the actual live one. So this is my online system here. So this is my proper Graphhonor dashboard, okay? Now remember I said AppMetrics just creates a whole load of metrics for you and tracks the kind of things that it thinks you ought to be tracking. The really cool thing about this is that Graphhonor on their website, they have their own packages thing effectively under Graphhonor Labs, where you can create a dashboard, and if you think, oh, that's a really useful dashboard and it uses a standard set of data, I'm going to share this dashboard with everybody else. And so the guy who made AppMetrics, and he made the thing that pumps it out to Flux DB, and he said, I'm going to create a dashboard that uses the metrics that I've put into InfluxDB, and I'm going to publish it on Graphhonor Labs. And so you can actually go to, there's a thing here where you can say add, and you can import, and you can just type 2125 is the number for InfluxDB using AppMetrics, and it'll just drag it in, and then you get this brilliant dashboard here, which looks like you worked really hard on it and it took you ages. And then what you do is you do that and then delete half of the dashboards and then take Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday off. And if anyone asks you what you're doing, you say, I'm working on the dashboard. And then on Friday, re-import it with all the finished dashboards and then bill for the whole week. You're welcome. I am available for... Please give me a reference. Okay. But no, so that is really very, very cool. The more sensibly, the good thing about it is you can then dig into that dashboard. You can see how those charts and graphs and everything are created. You can tweak them, you can fiddle with them, and it's a great way to get started, because starting from a blank screen in Graphhonor is terrifying. Actually, I'll show you how terrifying it is to start from a blank screen in Graphhonor, just because it is. So I'm going to create a dashboard. Okay, stop giving me errors. I don't care about the errors. And of course it's an unexpected error. All errors are unexpected. What the... Oh, I know why it's an unexpected error. It's because my internet's broken. God damn it. No internet on the internet. This is not going to go well. Sorry, I'm just going to hook it up to my phone. It's back. That would probably be good then. There was supposed to be a cable here somewhere, but I can't see it. Never mind. Right. So yes. So this is a new dashboard, and I'm going to create a graph. Okay? This is the least user-friendly experience in the whole of modern UX, because it has, I will grant it, has created a chart. How do I edit this? Does anyone care to have a guess how you edit this? The large plus sign. This one here? No, good guess, but you're absolutely wrong. No, it's this tiny little arrow just to the right of panel title. If you click that and go to edit, you get this view. The view that you would think would be the default for a new panel. Because you're just going to, oh, I'll just put a new panel in there, and then I'll put another new panel in, and then I'll just create lots of empty panels. So no. So that is how you get in there. And then from in here, you can do all sorts of interesting things, and you can go from AutoGen, you can change your data source to Bingo, and then you can choose your measurement, and you get nice drop-downs. So once you find out how to get into this, it's actually really good UX. It's just they hid it, and they still haven't fixed it, despite the #1 issue on the Graphhonor GitHub being, how do I edit a dashboard? Stack Overflow. This question may be a duplicate. So you get all those metrics out of the box, and I'll just very quickly kind of dash through them. I don't want to save that dashboard, but we have got, nope, I don't want to save my changes. So we got throughput, errors, active requests. We've got an AppDex score, and I will be explaining that later on. Throughput, response times, error rates. This is broken down by endpoint, so you can see how many requests per minute. So I've currently got 75 requests a minute to the game. Thank you, people in the room who said, yes, we will help you, Mark. The response time on the player homepage appears to be slow, but the rest of it's looking quite quick. Down here, we've got some tables. We've got lots of different things in here. So lots of really useful dashboards. That's all free. So that's literally 3 things. Add metrics, use metrics, and create a Graphhonor dashboard with the 2125. Just import that across, and then you can start fiddling with it. So just to clarify, actually, because I just lied. So that's not entirely everything, because by default, obviously, AppMetrics doesn't dump the data out to Influx. It is capable of dumping the data out to lots of different databases. It supports Prometheus and Graphite and various others. But you have to tell it that you want it to do that. So that's what the AppMetrics reporting Flux DB package is for. And then I need to put some configuration in there, which is just this code here. And I've got some configuration in my app settings development JSON. So I have got my, don't bother photographing that connection string. I don't use that for production databases. Password secret squirrel, yeah. So yes, I've got my metrics options in here, and this has a standard format. And so if you use the metrics options, it's all documented on the AppMetrics site. You can do quite a lot of configuration of how metrics are gathered and what numbers to use for certain things just by putting them in there, and it will load them automatically. In this instance, because I'm using Flux DB, which is not built in, I have to do a bit of extra work. But I just say my base URI and my database here, which is just the URL of the Influx server and the database to use. And then in my program, I add an extra thing here, configure metrics, and that takes a callback, which takes the builder context, so the web host builder context, and the app metrics builder. And I say builder configuration read from context.configuration, so that loads in everything from app settings.json and the environment and anywhere else. And then builder report to Influx DB, and just bind the metrics options to the metrics output formatter there. And that does all of that. So yeah, that's still quite easy. This code is all online, by the way. I pushed it to GitHub just before the talk started, and the URL will be at the end. So you can grab this if you want to steal the code and use it yourself. So don't worry too much about photographing it and then slavishly typing it in from a blurry photo on your phone going, what the hell does that say? Is that a 0 or an O? So yes, that's basically it. But that's giving you the bare minimum. That's just the stuff that everybody should be collecting. Your application is going to have its own semantics. It's going to have its own things that it's concerned about. That might be financial transactions, it might be active users, it might be the number of space hoppers you've sold. Still get space hoppers? Damn, those were brilliant. So you're going to need some custom metrics, and AppMetrics supports 6 types of custom metric. A counter, the first one, this is the simplest. A counter is just how many of something, and counters can go up and they can go down. So you might have a counter of active users, and you might say when a new user signs in, then increment active users, and you might then say if a user hasn't been active for 5 minutes, then decrement active users. You can count errors, you can count requests, and adding counters is very simple. So I have got a counter in my players controller here. So to record metrics, AppMetrics provides an iMetrics interface, and it automatically registers it with the dependency injection system if you're using ASP.NET Core. If you're not, then just create a metrics builder, build the metrics, and then hook it up with your own dependency injection system, or if you really must, set it as a static property on a static class and just access it from everywhere in your .NET application, you goddamn caveman or woman. And then within my code here, if I can find it, create player. I swear to God I had a bloody counter for this. Right. Did I put it in data? Yes, there it is. So, the way AppMetrics counters work is actually a bit weird. It sits in memory, and it is persistent in memory, which I discovered when I first started using AppMetrics, and I was doing a select sum, and I was getting tens of thousands of users on my site all concurrently, and I was like, this is the most popular site I've ever built. Wait a minute, no it's not. This is taking the same count every 5 seconds, and then I'm summing that over an hour to see, and yeah, I've actually got many fewer users than I thought I had. You have to reset the counter, or you have to take into account the fact that it is cumulative within your application. So in here, I have got my metrics, and you can use metrics directly, but what I prefer to do is create extension methods, which is something I got from .NET Core and the new logging extension, where they have a system where you create a delegate that wraps a log message so that you get fewer allocations, and so you create these delegates and then you make them available through extension methods on the logger. And it works to do that for metrics as well, because it means that people are using the same code to log the metrics. If you've got the same metric being logged from lots of different places, then you can make sure you've got the right tags, everyone's using the same naming and everything else. So if I go into players.countAsync, if I go into metrics.setPlayerCount, so every time somebody creates a new player account, I actually go to the database and say, tell me how many players there are in the table now. And this works at the moment because this is only a single instance of the website running. I would have to do more interesting things if this were load balanced. And then I have my setPlayerCount extension method, and OmniSharp is not working today. So my F12 is not working. So, to do a custom metric, you create an options object. So for a custom counter, you create a counter options object, and you give it a name, That's the bare minimum you have to do. And then you specify a measurement unit, and there are various other things you can do on there as well. One of the options on counter options is reset on flush. So that thing where it's storing the running count in memory. If you don't want it to do that, then you can say reset the counter every time it flushes, and then you will be able to do your summing in the database. Provider object, and that's what you use for working. Thank you. For working with the counter itself and doing things to it at runtime. Okay, so if you're looking for things like reset, then they're under provider and not under measure. Measure for measuring, provider for tweaking everything else. Okay. So that's a counter, and I can show you the counter in Graphhonor if I go to my analytics. And last 6 hours, my God, I love you all. Seriously, I just picked up 43 new players. Well done, guys. That's brilliant. See, this is the nice thing about dashboards, because if I didn't have this, then I wouldn't have my heart wouldn't have grown 3 sizes and broken the micrometer and saved Christmas. Do you have the Grinch in Portugal? I don't know. The Jim Carrey version, maybe. So yes, so that's my counter going through there, and the query for this is really simple. It is literally just so from my autogen. I'll explain what that is in just a second. I've got an application __ players. So appmetrics prefixes all its metrics with application. You can change that by setting an option. And then it's used the name that I gave my counter options, players, as the remaining name of the metric. And then I'm just selecting the field value. And this is, it does this group by interval thing. So effectively it's saying, do a query for each minute, or whatever you've told it to do. And this is probably flushing this out 12 times a minute. I think it defaults to 5 seconds to flush, maybe 10 seconds. So what I want for each of those minutes is the highest value from that minute. So you always have to specify an aggregation here. And you can do lots of different ones, and it's all done on these selectors and pop-ups. And so you can do mean, you can do median, you can do all sorts of interesting stuff. But if you've got a counter, and you know that it's always being set to the actual count, and rather than just incrementing it and going, right, so there were 5 this minute and then 8 the next minute, then max will give you the highest value within a given minute. Okay? I can also muck about with my time ranges up at the top here, and this is standard across all dashboards, and I can actually do funky cool things like drag into there, and then it shows me that data, except it doesn't for reasons. I love reasons. Okay, so then we have meters. And a meter is a windowed and cumulative count of events, okay? So it's how often is this thing happening, and also how many times did it happen in the last minute, in the last 5 minutes, in the last 15 minutes, and in the last hour. And you can expand that out, and you can kind of add in different windows and everything else. So this is really useful for error rates or other kind of system level things. This will show you, right, suddenly there's lots of errors. There have been hundreds of errors in the last minute, but there weren't actually that many in the last 15 minutes, so something has just gone really horrifically, terribly, terribly wrong. And I'm going to show you a meter, and I'm also going to show you within the meter thing, the new CLR metrics pieces, okay? So, this is my metric service here, and I have my GC event listener. So this is something they added in .NET Core 2.2, and it's actually .NET Core rather than ASP.NET Core. .NET Framework has always written a whole stream of events out to the Windows performance counters and event tracing for Windows, which is why if you go into Purview, you've got things like thread pool and GC allocations and lots of other things that you can chart in there, which was great when we just had .NET and it ran on Windows. But now we have .NET Core and it runs on Linux and those weird shiny things. But the event tracing for Windows is not available on Linux, and they made it work with LTTNG and various other Linux things, but it became difficult, and it meant you had to do lots of different things in different places. And so in .NET Core 2.2, they added it to the internal event stream as well, and so you can now write code in your .NET application that receives these events and does useful things with it. And it's very, very simple. You just create an event listener, which inherits from event listener, and then you override two methods on event source created, and you say if event source.name is Microsoft-Windows-.NET runtime, because magic strings, then enable events, because we don't want to pick them up for anything else, but we'll get them for Windows.NET runtime. And then every event, you will get this on event written method being called, and you can just there's documentation on docs.microsoft.com on what events are, what they're called, what their event ID is, which is just a number. And then you can say, right, so if it's the thread pool worker thread adjustment, honestly, that's what it's called. Then the second number in the event payload for that is the new worker thread count. And so then in my metrics, I can set the new worker thread count, and I can track the worker thread count in the thread pool using that. It also triggers an event every time an exception is thrown, even if it's one of those nasty exceptions that you can't actually catch. And also, it will show this for the exceptions that happen deep down inside frameworks like WPF or ASP.NET Core, where they trigger an exception but then catch it internally, so you never know it happened, but it's why your application is running slowly. And so you can get that data out of there as well. So I'm just storing two of those, and then those are going through to a metric counter, and I have thread pool metrics here. And this isn't a meter, it's a gauge. What did I do for meters? Yes, gauges are instantaneous values. What did I do for meters? I definitely did something with meters. I do apologize. Anything past 5 minutes and it all falls apart. Game controller. Oh, exceptions. There you go. That makes much more sense. So yes, I have an exception metrics. I'm not going to dig too far into this, but that counts the number of CLR exceptions being thrown. So yeah, this is coming from the other side of things there. So yeah, we also have a few other things in there, but this I have a meter options. It's basically the same. They have some slight differences, but they're very similar. It's just to do with how the data is being recorded and the range of values that it stores. So meter options defaults to sort of overall last minute, last 5 minutes, last 15 minutes. So we are marking that something happened on the meter, and then it will put that into the windows, and then you can do different queries on these in Graphhonor. Then we have gauges with bonus new CLR metrics. So I showed you gathering the thread pool count. So that's going into thread pool metrics here, where we just say gauge.setValue, because a gauge is literally just a track of a number over time. And yeah, so thread count, it goes up and down. Things like CPU, memory usage, network saturation, that sort of thing, go into gauges. I also have another one in there, process metrics, which just says check the physical memory by using working set and set the physical memory in use as well. Okay. Timer, how long things take, and so I've got timers around all my database queries to see how long my database queries are taking. That is very, very simple, but it uses a nice pattern, so I will just show you that. So those are all in the data project. So database metrics. And so this, I've got a player query timer, and I've got various other timers in here. And this works by creating a disposable object. So doing metrics.measure.timer.time and passing in my timer options here. For timer options, you specify a duration unit and a rate unit. And so if you want to record the number of whatevers per whatever, then you can say do that per minute or per hour, and then that will reset the counter on that basis. But yes, when I call time, it returns a disposable object, which means that in my actual player data class here, I have a player count query timer, and I can just put that into a using statement. So it creates the timer, runs whatever's inside it, and then the dispose method on the timer actually records the metric, which means you don't have to worry about whether exceptions are being thrown or anything like that, because effectively using is a try, finally dispose. Just makes it much easier. And with C#8, you'll just be, if you want to time how long the rest of this method takes, we've now got using statements. So you can just say using this, which they totally stole from Go's defer. So timers. Timers are very, very simple and easy as well. And then we have histograms. Histograms is values in buckets. So a histogram is something like, you say, right, so requests could take less than 10 milliseconds, they could take less than 25 milliseconds, less than 50, less than a second, and more than a second. So you've got 5 buckets, and then you count and you increment those buckets. So if a request did take less than 10 milliseconds, you increment that bucket. And then that lets you show the distribution of counts across a range of different buckets. That's the most canonical one. That's the one that everybody uses. But you can do lots of different things with histograms. Influx is not actually great at histograms. Prometheus supports them as a first-class thing. Influx 2 is supporting them as a first-class thing, at which point I will probably add an example in here. But I don't have one at the moment. But they're there and you can use them. And then the final one is the AppDex score. And this is a standard, short for Application Performance Index. And this is a formula designed to calculate whether your users are satisfied with the performance of your application. And to a certain extent, only you can determine that. And so what constitutes satisfaction for you is something you will have to configure. But it is a lovely formula. And this is the first time I've ever used the formula editor in PowerPoint, so yay. So your AppDex score is the number of satisfied users plus the number of not satisfied but they're okay users divided by 2, all divided by the total number of samples that you've taken, okay? And it will be a value between 0 and 1. And you want it as close to 1 as possible. And so this is things like, you can set what your SLA is. So you might say that a satisfied user is anybody whose query takes less than half a second. A tolerating user is everybody whose request takes less than 2 seconds. And an unhappy user is everybody whose request takes longer than 2 seconds. So then we throw those numbers into this application. We say we've got 60 satisfied users. We've got 30 unhappy users divided by 2, so that's 15. So we've got 75, divide that by 100, and that gives us an AppDex score of 0.75. And that's okay. If your AppDex score goes under 0.5, then you need to go in and fix something. If it's up around 1, then bonus time for everybody. And AppMetrics, just the standard web tracking that it puts in, gives you an AppDex score, and there's an AppDex page on the Graphhonor dashboard in there. So yes, you can see my AppDex score over here, and it's showing the breakdown within there as well. But yes, you can also, what a lot of people do with their AppDex score is they do that as a kind of speedometer gauge thing, and it goes red below a certain number, which is a nice visualization. If you can persuade your boss to get you an 85-inch OLED screen to stick up in the office, then that's the thing you have in the middle that says, is everything okay? And when that goes red, that's panic time and PagerDuty. So, just want to do a quick run through of APM software. So we've got storage, visualization, monitoring, time series databases, Flux DB, Prometheus, Graphite, OpenTSD, Postgres, mainly Influx. The reason I prefer Influx to Prometheus, by the way, is that you push data to Influx, Prometheus scrapes data from your application, and it's a bugger to set up. But Prometheus is great for pulling data from Kubernetes and so forth. You've got storage proxies, statsd and capacitor. So you might want to put a proxy in, so you're not writing directly to Influx, you write to a proxy, and then that writes to Influx and maybe to other places as well. Visualization dashboards, you've got Graphhonor, you've got Chronograph, which is good for exploring data, but it only works with Influx at the moment. Graphite also comes with its own dashboarding tool, but Graphhonor is the standard, everybody uses it, and it is basically free. Monitoring, I do have, so the system level stuff, CPU, network, memory, and so forth. There's something called Telegraph, which you can just download and start it running on your Linux box, and that starts pushing data through, and that again comes with a standard Graphhonor dashboard that will show you the health of the system that your stuff is running on. You've also got CollectD, which is a kind of more cross-platform version. If you're on Windows, you've got perf counters. There's lots of different solutions for this. Telegraph you can get from Influx data as well. Actually, Influx do what they call the tick stack, which is Telegraph, Influx, Chronograph, and capacitor, and those 4 things working together can give you a really, really solid APM pipeline. Capacitor will do alerting and various other things as well. One last thing to mention about Influx in particular is it was designed to work with solid-state disks. Do not run Influx. You can just about get away with running it on spinning disks if they're nice, fast spinning disks, or if they're the hybrid disks, but do not run it over network shares. It doesn't work. It will just, data just builds up and builds up and builds up in memory, and then the entire machine has to be rebooted, and then it just starts building up again, and you're not actually storing any of your data. So you need fast disks for that. So, in summary, I'm sorry I went 5 minutes over and delayed your lunch. Measure everything. If you're not sure whether you should measure it or not, you should. If you don't think you should measure it, you probably should anyway. You cannot measure too much. That autogen thing, by the way, that I mentioned, that's a retention policy. That says how long Influx will keep data for within a retention policy. And you can set that to a day, 7 days, a year. Different things go into different retention policies. So you can say, I don't care about anything older than 24 hours. But yes, measure everything. Measure it into a time series database. Plot it using Graphhonor dashboards, and all the code, including examples of counters and metrics and gauges and configuration and everything, is at github.com/rendlelabs/ndc-bingo. That is it from me. I hope that was helpful. I hope you're all going to go back to your offices and go, we need metrics and dashboards, and take Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday off. Thanks very much for listening to me. Enjoy the rest of your day.